Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Corey Cook. I'm a professor at the University of San Francisco. I wanted to share some research we just finished this afternoon about the 2011 election. I had an opportunity to meet with Commission staff to talk about your interest in this topic and was sort of rushing to get this to you in advance of the meeting and almost made it. In any case, the purpose of this piece is to replicate some of what Francis Neely and I did several years ago, looking at the ballot image data from the ranked choice elections early in San Francisco's experience. And the effort is to discern whether certain population groups, geographic or demographic population groups, experience particular challenges with a ranked choice ballot, whether they fully articulate all of their preferences on the ballot, and so forth. The central findings of this research for the 2011 mayoral election is that communities with higher proportions of Asian and Pacific Islander residents, Latino residents, older voters, and actually progressive communities were more likely to make errors on the ballot. Overall, I think 1.3% of people in San Francisco made an error that could invalidate their ballot using ranked choice voting. In some precincts, the figure was almost 10%. I would say to Supervisor Alagi, of the 12 precincts with the highest concentration of voter errors, 7 of them were in the Western Addition, Fillmore, Japantown. So there is a geographic component to this, which I think is interesting and merits further research. We also look at ranking behaviors, people who are likely to use all 3 rankings, people who are less likely to what's considered bullet voting, only look at only voting for one candidate. We find that precincts with higher concentrations of older voters, actually more moderate voters, again Latino voters and Pacific Islander voters, were more likely to only rank one candidate and not to use the full complement of rankings. I came in part because I wanted to share the research. We're hoping to put it out on Monday to the public and post it on our website and so forth, but also to encourage you to look into putting forth an RFP to do further research on ranked choice voting. I think the limits of the data are sort of where we are right now, which is I think we can do a pretty good job of slicing and dicing the numbers and looking at what voters actually did, and we're able to correlate that very strongly with different characteristics of who actually voted in those individual precincts using voter file data and figuring out who, what the composition of the electorate was. And for those of you who are interested, the second half of the report is actually a demographic breakdown of who actually voted in 2011 compared to 2010, 2008, and it looks at that by neighborhood as well, which I thought was sort of a fun thing to include.
I know that Commissioner Avalos has a question for you.
Sure, I'm sorry, yes.
Well, I can wait for you to finish if you had more. Or?
I was just going to say that I think the next step is to really talk with voters in a number of ways about how we can really focus on alleviating some of the disparities we discover in ranked choice voting. I think from my view, we need to do some survey research like San Francisco State Public Research Institute, Francis Neely and Lisa Blash and I did several years ago. We need to do focus groups with monolingual populations and populations that are less likely to vote generally. And I think we ought to be doing some experimental design, looking at ballot design to figure out if there are ways of dealing with the disparities we uncover in terms of how voters experience the ballot.
Commissioner Avalos.
Thank you. It's actually very, very interesting information. On a couple questions. What invalidated a ballot in your study?
So the thing that can invalidate a ballot is what's considered an overvote, which is where you rank 2 candidates in the same column. Not all of those ballots are in fact invalidated. So actually in this report we distinguish between voters who cast overvotes. But for example, if you were a voter's first choice and they cast an overvote in the second column, their ballot would not be invalidated. It would have actually gone to your column and then have never been invalidated. So we actually distinguish between those that could be invalidated and were not, and those that actually were invalidated because before they cast a vote for somebody who was in the final round, they actually cast an error and that vote was discarded. And the margin is different. I think it's 1.3% of voters had an error on their ballot on one of the 3 citywide races. I think 1.1 had a ballot that was actually invalidated by virtue of having this mistake made.
And so you actually counted ballot errors different from invalidated ballots as well?
We do both because I understand that some of the advocates on either side view this differently, and so we wanted to be completely transparent and consistent with how both different perspectives argue their case about ranked choice voting. So we wanted to talk about both ballots that have errors and ballots that were invalidated so that, frankly, we weren't taking sides with either perspective.
And is there any difference in terms of the severity of an error? For instance, someone who voted for the same candidate once and no other candidates in any other rounds, and someone who voted for the same candidate multiple times?
Those are treated the same, and they're treated the same by the Department of Elections. And so for our study, we treat those the same. So if a voter were to vote for one person in column 1, 2, and 3, and just vote for one person, it's considered a bullet vote had they only voted for one person once. And because the Department of Elections categorized it that way, we can argue whether voters made a mistake in doing that, but as the vote is counted validly, we only report that as if they only preferred one.
And if a voter voted for a candidate in only one column and just voted for that one candidate, that's not considered an error?
No, it's just considered a bullet vote. So among the things we look at in this study include voters. But one thing that happened in this election that hadn't happened really previously in a citywide election is that something like almost a quarter of voters who ranked 3 choices ranked someone other than yourself or Mayor Lee. And as a result, their ballot was invalidated despite ranking 3 choices. So we look at all the different range of things voters may have done. Did they only vote for 1? Did they vote for 2? Did they vote for 3? If they voted for 3, did their vote ultimately accrue to a candidate in the final round, or was it exhausted without having accrued to a candidate? We look at all those different dimensions.
Thank you. And for the purposes of, because you did mention a voter voting for one candidate once only, that was marked or that was noted, but that's not noted with any kind of value about whether it's.
No, not at all. And one of the things that we're trying to discern, because we find patterns, for example, I think roughly 9% of voters only voted for one candidate in each of the 3 citywide elections. Now, we make no judgment about why voters did that, but I think it's important to find out why, because it is geographically concentrated and it does correlate with demographic characteristics. So it could be many reasons that voters would do that. I think for us to understand ranked choice voting, the next step would be talk with voters and figure out, was that voters not understanding the voting system? Was that voters really only preferring one choice? Was that the candidate saying only vote for one? So what caused voters to behave in such a way? And so that's what we want to, I think, the next step of trying to get at.
That's great, because I think that's useful to note, because that's a choice. If you just choose to vote one and leave other columns blank, that's one of the choices you have under ranked choice voting. You don't have to fill out all the.
You're not required to fill out all the choices, correct?
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.